Under the trembling light of Los Angeles dawn, Finn stood at the edge of his own conscience, the ocean's hum filling the space where words no longer sufficed. He had been a doctor before he was a husband, a savior before he was a father. But now those callings, once so noble, so clearly defined, had turned against one another, tearing him into pieces too jagged to reconcile. Sheila's voice still echoed in his head, that low, pleading tone that had become his curse. It wasn't a call for manipulation this time, not another test of loyalty or blood. It was a cry of terror. For the first time, Finn had heard something in her voice that he had never heard before, genuine fear. And it was that note of humanity, faint and dying, that undid him completely. For months, he had promised Steffi that Sheila was no longer part of their lives. He had chosen his wife, his family, his home, the fragile, beautiful order that had cost them both so much to rebuild. Yet beneath those promises lived an unspoken truth. He could never entirely erase Sheila from his heart, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't stop being the man who wanted to save her. That paradox had always defined him. It was what made him admirable in Steffi's eyes, and what terrified her the most. The healer and the husband, two sides of the same soul, destined to destroy each other. The call had come just before midnight. The number was blocked, but the voice was unmistakable. "Finn," she had whispered, trembling. "Please, I need you." There had been noise, shattering glass, a man shouting, and then the dull thud of something falling. He had said nothing, frozen in the doorway of their bedroom, phone cold against his ear. Beside him, Steffi stirred, her sleep-light voice calling his name. He turned toward her, the blue glow of the screen slicing through the dark, revealing the fear etched across his face. She knew before he spoke. There was only one person who could summon that look in him. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not this time." But Finn's silence was its own confession. He had sworn an oath, first to medicine, then to love, and both were binding him now in opposite directions. He wanted to believe that saving Sheila would not mean betraying Steffi, that compassion was not the same as weakness. Yet deep down, he knew what she knew. Every time he answered Sheila's call, a small part of his loyalty to his wife died. Sheila's manipulations were not just emotional, they were spiritual, consuming the moral compass of anyone who dared to care for her. Steffi rose from the bed, her hair disheveled, her expression sharp with exhaustion and disbelief. "You can't keep doing this," she said. "Every time she reaches out, you become hers again." Her words were soft but devastating. Finn opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to articulate what burned in his chest. To her, this was a matter of choice, between the woman he loved and the woman who had tried to kill her. But to him, it was something more complicated, something primal. "If I don't go," he wanted to say, "someone will die." Yet he knew that to Steffi, those words would sound like betrayal disguised as virtue. The weight of his indecision filled the room like static. He looked down at the phone again, at the faint glow of the missed call, and felt the pull of both worlds tightening around him. He could almost hear Sheila's breathing, feel her terror reaching across miles of darkness. And then, without realizing it, his fingers moved. He called her back. Steffi turned away, the quiet sound of her heartbreak louder than any scream. "If you go," she said, "you may save her, but you'll lose me." He hesitated, only for a second, then reached for his coat. The drive through the city was an endless blur of red lights and guilt. Every shadow on the highway looked like judgment. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, gripping it too tightly, as though holding onto control might absolve him. The night air was cold against his skin, the kind of cold that seeps into the soul. He replayed Steffi's voice in his mind, her warning, her despair, the way she had once told him that compassion could kill just as easily as cruelty. He had dismissed it then as cynicism born of trauma. Now he understood it was prophecy. When he reached the address Sheila had sent, a small, decrepit motel near the city's edge, the parking lot was deserted except for a single flickering light. He stepped out, every instinct telling him to turn back. But medicine had trained him to walk toward pain, not away from it. The door was ajar. Inside, the smell of blood hit him before his eyes adjusted to the dark. Sheila lay on the floor, her hands pressed to her abdomen, her breathing shallow. Someone had stabbed her, not fatally, but deliberately enough to send a message. Her eyes fluttered open when she saw him. "You came," she whispered, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't tell whether it was gratitude or triumph in her voice. He knelt beside her, slipping into the rhythm of care that had always been his sanctuary. The moment his hands touched her skin, the noise in his head went silent. There were no memories, no questions, only action: stabilize the bleeding, check her vitals, keep her awake. The doctor in him overpowered the man in him, and for a fleeting moment, it felt almost pure. But purity, in Finn's world, never lasted long. When the sirens approached in the distance, Sheila gripped his wrist weakly. "They'll think you did this," she murmured, and her eyes, glassy with pain, locked onto his. "You have to believe me, it wasn't me this time. Please." The words carved into him like a scalpel. Because deep down, he did believe her. Not because she deserved it, but because he wanted to believe that even monsters could bleed honestly. He called 911, gave his statement, and stayed until the paramedics arrived. By the time they loaded her into the ambulance, the first photographers had already begun to gather outside, their lenses flashing like accusations. Back home, Steffi watched the news unfold in silence. Her husband's name appeared in headlines beside Sheila's, the words "doctor" and "criminal" bleeding into each other. Ridge called, then Brooke, then Thomas, all demanding explanations she didn't have. But the worst part wasn't the scandal, it was the quiet knowledge that this wasn't a misunderstanding. Finn had chosen. He had gone. When he returned at dawn, she was waiting. Her eyes were red from sleeplessness, but her posture was rigid, as if holding herself upright were the only way to keep from collapsing. "You didn't even hesitate," she said when he stepped inside. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. "She needed help," he replied softly, his voice frayed with fatigue. "I'm a doctor." "And what am I?" Steffi shot back. "What is your family? What about our children? Don't we need you too?" Her words landed like blows. Finn opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "Every time she calls, you go. Every time she bleeds, you forget who she is. And every time, I lose more of you." He looked at her then, and the weight of his guilt almost made him collapse. "If I hadn't gone, she might have died," he whispered. Steffi's eyes glistened. "Maybe that's the point." The silence that followed was unbearable, the sound of two souls recognizing that love was no longer enough to make them one. Over the next few days, the fallout consumed them. Reporters camped outside their home. Colleagues questioned his judgment. His hospital board demanded a leave of absence until the investigation cleared. Finn's career, once immaculate, now carried the taint of suspicion. But none of that mattered compared to the coldness that had taken root between him and Steffi. They still shared a house, still shared meals, still tucked their children into bed, but it was all choreography now, a performance of normalcy built on the ruins of trust. Finn told himself he had done the right thing, but in the quiet hours of the night, that conviction began to rot. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Steffi's face, not angry, but broken. And worse, he saw Sheila's, pale, trembling, smiling faintly through her pain, as if she had orchestrated even this. Then came the twist he hadn't foreseen. Evidence emerged that Sheila might indeed have been framed, a rival from her criminal past, someone with motive and resources. The revelation should have indicated Finn. Instead, it destroyed him further. Because now his choice, once painted as moral weakness, was technically right. But in proving his virtue, he had shattered his marriage. Steffi wanted to believe him, but belief wasn't trust. "You were right," she admitted one evening, her voice almost a whisper. "You saved her life. But you didn't save ours." Finn reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "It's not that I don't love you," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's that I don't know who you are anymore." You say you save people, but you don't see how many you lose in the process. Her words lingered long after she left the room. Finn stood there, surrounded by the echoes of his own principles, realizing for the first time that morality meant nothing without understanding. He had wanted to be good, a good man, a good doctor, a good husband, but in trying to be everything, he had become something unrecognizable. Weeks later, he visited Sheila again, this time not as her doctor, but as her son. She was recovering well, her strength returning like poison creeping back into her veins. She smiled when she saw him, that familiar, unsettling smile that mixed maternal pride with calculation. "You came again," she said softly. "You always will." He didn't answer. He stood at the foot of her bed, watching her breathe, wondering how someone so fragile could wield such power over him. For a fleeting moment, he considered walking away forever. But then she coughed, and instinct overrode thought once more. He moved closer, adjusting her fore, checking her pulse, the motions automatic, inevitable. When he finally stepped outside, the sun was setting, that same Los Angeles gold he had once shared with Steffi, now dulled by regret. He thought of her laugh, their children, the home that no longer felt like his. He thought of the promise he had made to do no harm, and realized how impossible that promise truly was. Every act of compassion carried its own cruelty. Every rescue left someone behind. And so, Finn's story became the most painful kind of tragedy, not of villains and heroes, but of a man torn between two definitions of goodness. If he saved Sheila, he betrayed Steffi. If he abandoned Sheila, he betrayed himself. There was no right answer, only the quiet devastation of choosing one love over another. The love of duty over the love of family, the love of forgiveness over the love of peace. In the end, Finn stood alone in the hospital corridor, the smell of antiseptic and memory mingling in the air. He had saved Sheila. She was alive. But somewhere along the way, something inside him had died. That certainty, that innocence that once made him believe goodness could exist without consequence. Back home, Steffi stared at her wedding ring under the soft glow of the kitchen light. It still shone, but faintly, like something surviving on borrowed light. She slipped it off, not out of hatred, but out of mercy for him, for herself, for the truth that love sometimes means walking away before it consumes what's left. And somewhere, far from both of them, Sheila smiled to herself, knowing she didn't have to win him back. She had already done what she always did best, blurred the line between love and loyalty until no one could tell the difference. For Finn, the real question would never stop echoing. If compassion is what makes us human, why does it so often destroy the people we love most? That was the lesson of his life, and the price of his soul. Under the soft gold of the Los Angeles sunset, the world of the bold and the beautiful shimmered in that delicate balance between illusion and revelation, where every word carried consequence and every silence concealed a secret. Tuesday, November 11th, unfolded like a turning page in a long, fragile story, a day when love, betrayal, and redemption intertwined in unexpected ways. It was a day when old wounds were reopened not by cruelty, but by the desperate need to feel something real again. And at the heart of it all stood three women, Daphne, Steffi, and Taylor, each facing a truth that could no longer be postponed. Carter Walton had always believed in the power of redemption. He was a man who built his reputation on trust and integrity, yet his heart had often strayed where reason warned him not to. His engagement to Hope had ended not with anger, but with exhaustion, the quiet collapse that follows when two people love the idea of each other more than the reality. Hope had drifted back into her world of familiar complications, and Carter was left with the one emotion he feared most: emptiness. Into that void returned Daphne, as stunning as ever but sharper, colder, more self-assured. She had once chased him with unguarded affection, only to be humiliated by his rejection. Now she had returned not as a wounded lover, but as a test, one that Carter didn't yet know he was failing. Their reunion wasn't the grand spectacle he imagined. There were no apologies, No confessions whispered under moonlight. Instead, Daphne met him with poise and calculation, her eyes gleaming with challenge rather than affection. She refused his easy charm, the gentle smile that had melted so many hearts before. She wanted proof, not of his attraction, but of his integrity. "Show me," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. "Prove you're not the same man who walks away when things stop flattering him." That single demand struck Carter deeper than any accusation could. For years he had been the rescuer, the loyal man, the one who gave others reasons to trust again. But Daphne's words revealed something uncomfortable. He had never been forced to earn forgiveness. Now, faced with her quiet defiance, he realized that redemption wasn't given. It had to be earned, inch by inch, through humility and time. Daphne, too, was fighting her own battle. Beneath her polished confidence was a woman terrified of vulnerability. She had built her new life on self-sufficiency, convincing herself she needed no one. Yet standing before Carter, the past surged like a tide she had tried to outrun. The ache of rejection still lived in her bones. When she demanded proof, it wasn't just about Carter's sincerity, it was about reclaiming her dignity. Love, she told herself, was only worth having if it no longer demanded her submission. But her composure faltered when Carter reached for her hand, his touch gentle but pleading. For a moment, the walls she'd spent years rebuilding trembled. She withdrew before they could fall completely, leaving him in silence, both of them haunted by the same question: could two broken hearts ever rebuild something untainted by their past mistakes? Across town, another kind of silence settled over Taylor Hayes's home, a silence born not of distance, but of fear. Steffi Forrester stood by the window, watching the light fade over the hills. It had been months since she'd returned from Europe, seeking peace after the chaos that nearly destroyed her family. But peace, she was learning, was not an absence of conflict. It was a choice made every day against the pull of memory. The ghosts of Luna's crimes still lingered, whispering through her thoughts whenever the house grew too quiet. Sheila Carter had assured her that Luna would remain behind bars for life, but Steffi knew better than to trust assurances when Sheila's name was involved. Her instincts warned her that every calm carried the seed of another storm. And yet, for all her strength, Steffi's concern that evening wasn't for herself. It was for her mother. Taylor had withdrawn into her own quiet solitude, a habit Steffi recognized as both protection and penance. Since Ridge had remarried Brooke, Taylor had carried her heartbreak with silent dignity, hiding it beneath her devotion to others. She had even thrown herself into helping Deacon Sharp navigate his turbulent relationship with Sheila, a professional boundary she had crossed with dangerous ease. What had begun as therapy had evolved into late-night conversations, laughter, and a kind of intimacy that both terrified and comforted her. Steffi saw the signs. She saw the flicker in her mother's eyes whenever Deacon's name was mentioned. But Taylor denied it, insisting that everything between them was purely professional. That lie was growing heavy now. Deacon's friends called him that had started to sense it. He was not a fool. He knew when someone was holding back. The man who once lived by manipulation had grown surprisingly perceptive since finding stability, and Taylor's restraint only deepened his curiosity. He began to wonder whether she had told him the full truth about their encounters, about her reasons for helping him beyond duty. Did she see him as a project, or as a mirror? Was she still carrying the remnants of a love she had never resolved, for Ridge, for herself, or for the life she lost trying to save everyone but her own heart? Steffi, always the mediator between chaos and calm, decided it was time to push her mother out of hiding. "You need to breathe again," she said gently, coaxing Taylor towards something new, something alive. The open mic night at Il Giardino seemed harmless enough, a chance to listen, to laugh, to remember what joy felt like. Steffi insisted that Taylor attend, not as a therapist or a mother, but as a woman rediscovering her own rhythm. It wasn't just about music, it was about reclaiming her voice. Taylor hesitated, as she always did when emotion threatened to break through her composure. But Steffi's determination was unrelenting. She knew that sometimes the only way to heal was to be seen. And so, under the dim lights of the open mic stage, Taylor found herself surrounded by strangers who sang about heartbreak as if it were holy. When Deacon arrived unexpectedly, their eyes met across the room. The air shifted, the kind of shift that only happens when two people realize they are standing at the edge of something dangerous and inevitable. For a moment, Taylor felt her walls crumble. She remembered the warmth of his voice during those long therapy sessions, the way he listened without judgment, the small moments when laughter had replaced shame. But guilt followed swiftly, reminding her of lines not to be crossed, of ethics, of reputation. Yet somewhere deep down, she wondered if maybe she deserved this, not perfection but honesty, however flawed. Meanwhile, back in Carter's world, the tension between him and Daphne deepened. He tried to show her that he had changed, that he had learned from the past, but words were no longer enough. Daphne needed action, consistency, proof that he could stand beside her not out of convenience, but conviction. Carter began small, respecting her space, listening more than speaking, allowing her to lead. But the challenge of rebuilding trust was more painful than either anticipated. Old habits resurfaced, his need to fix, her need to flee. They danced around each other like survivors afraid of fire, drawn by heat yet terrified of being burned again. Hope, watching from afar, couldn't help but notice Carter's struggle. Part of her pitied him, another part envied Daphne. Hope had known Carter's kindness, but not his passion. Daphne brought out a side of him that Hope never reached, a raw, unfiltered intensity that made him unpredictable. For the first time in a long while, Hope wondered if she had ever really known the man she left behind. As night fell over Los Angeles, the city itself seemed to vibrate with possibility. At Il Giardino, laughter mixed with music, and Taylor finally allowed herself to smile, not out of politeness, but from genuine release. When Deacon approached her after the show, his voice low and uncertain, she didn't retreat. They talked, not as therapist and patient, but as two people stripped of pretense. He confessed his doubts, that he feared she hadn't told him everything, that perhaps she still carried parts of herself locked away. Taylor met his gaze and, for once, didn't hide. "Maybe I haven't," she admitted softly. "But I want to." The simplicity of those words broke something open between them, not passion yet, but understanding. Back at the Forrester estate, Steffi sat alone on the terrace, watching the stars. She had spent so many years fighting, for her family, her marriage, her sanity, that she had almost forgotten how to simply be. Tonight felt different. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a step toward it. She thought of her mother's laughter at the cafe, of Carter and Daphne finding their way through broken trust, of Deke learning to believe in something beyond survival. For once, everyone she loved was moving, not backward, but forward, even if only by inches. But beneath that fragile sense of progress lingered a deeper current, one that no one could quite name. The city still carried secrets, and every new beginning risked awakening the ghosts of the past.